Yeah.
I did 7 of
3 staff members with 6
so
kids right now.
it's like
I know
a
of.
10K, but it's their area code, so they do an extra mile. So 7 miles I did 7-minute mile, 7, 10. And most of it.
We got 1, 2, 3,
Oh, way better than that.
We didn't give them
7.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
I'm
Nine.
still though that
Eight
last 2 miles were
So, like,
brutal.
so tired.
I felt like
I'm
up to
so
about
sick of the past. I'm driving. I'm like, this is
fifth
not a
mile, I was like, oh dude, I'm feeling better than that last one. I was like, oh shit.
But I got my first
There's one
double
more, too.
ticket of the year.
So how many?
All right, so it sounds like Troy is running just a few minutes behind, but he should be joining us shortly.
Okay. Is Angela gonna be in this meeting, or was this one she was gonna miss?
Yeah, so Angie, Tiffany, and Abby, I know are all out today.
Okay.
Lori, I think whenever you're ready.
Buddy.
Yeah, so we're gonna open the meeting. It's 9:02 on November 12th. Can I get a roll call, please?
Katie Souls.
Bill Palmer.
Mark Thompson.
Lori Hannon,
Nick Crabb, Greg Beckler.
Steve Fitzgerald.
That's saying yeah. Good.
okay. Approval of the agenda. You get a motion for approval of the agenda.
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Hi.
I.
All right. Approval of the consent agenda. Can I get a motion for approval of the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Okay, I'm taking notes here. So who made the approval of the agenda?
Greg.
I
Greg.
did.
Thank you.
That was, Greg's and then Parks for the.
We flip-flopped.
The consent was the other
Yeah,
way
it was
around.
the other way around.
Greg and Parks,
Yeah.
and then Parks and Greg.
It's like we're playing ball.
Great. Okay, good. Thank you.
All right. All right, I'll give it off to you for open forum. Okay, let's move on to discussion and actions of the tax increment investment policy draft.
Okay,
So I mean, Sarah and Troy.
might have to wait for Troy.
Yeah.
Okay. He's not here yet. Okay, sorry.
Oh, and here comes Troy.
Perfect.
Hey, good morning, Troy. And how about Barry? Anybody heard from Barry?
They're in Mexico.
Oh,
No,
think-
it should be here.
I think everyone, I'm assuming he went. I know his wife is. So I think they're closed down, and I think
Yeah, I saw him yesterday.
that's why I don't know if he
But-
went
but-
or if it was just his wife or.
Hi, Troy. We are a bit of a smaller group today, and I'm actually remote. I've got a sick kiddo. But we just got to the financial policy document on the agenda.
Sounds good. All righty. Good morning, everyone.
good morning.
Good morning.
All righty. So I'm just going to pull up a copy for myself here. I'm really pleased to put this together for you all. I think that you guys are starting off in a great position. As I said at a previous meeting, getting increment in the first year is a really good start as a background to the policy. And I really look at the policy as kind of a dynamic document, something that's really meant to be referenced and read. I don't think I would expect everyone to read it by this morning. So don't feel bad if you haven't. It's a lot of information. And I'll walk through kind of how it's meant to be kind of read. And it is purposeful in some ways that it can be read in parts, okay? So that you can kind of take the information at smaller bite sizes. And so for me, the cover of the document is actually important because there's a little box at the top right-hand corner. That's the version of the policy document that is currently going to be in place upon adoption. And I have that as a different color upon different versions, okay? And all the colors match the DDA logo exactly. It's about as creative as I get in terms of art and whatever. So, but it's my simple way of knowing when a policy version has been updated, okay? And sometimes we'll have to add a note, but at the very least, the front page tells you, hey, this is the 2024 version or perhaps the 2025 version, depending on when we adopt this. And the document opens up with a reference to the plan of development. So I'm referencing the plan of development throughout this document, okay? The plan of development is your kind of governing document. It's kind of what you're supposed to be doing as a DDA. This document will kind of help you guide you on how you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do as a DDA, okay? And so I start out with, hold on. Forgive me here. My computer was really slow this morning.
Hey, Troy, while you're pulling up what you want, I have a
Yep.
general question now. So this
Please.
document, I'm assuming that some of it is kind of boilerplate out of statute and other is what you created to make it workable for people. Can you kind of explain that process, how it's put together?
Sure, sure. So this was from an existing template for another client, but I went through it word for word, and I've actually substantially improved, I would say 90% of the document. So you have a new improved version that's probably 90% me and maybe 10% kind of canned stuff. I try to make these as personalized a document as possible. And certainly, if there's something missing in that regard, I really want everyone to feel some ownership of this document. It is your document. It is a document that I hope you reference when you need it. And so if there's something missing that's an element specific to Fraser, please let me know and I'll be sure to incorporate it. And so go ahead.
Can I have one more question? Then you
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm also curious, as we work our way through, I know in the introduction, you referenced the statute. If there's other areas in here that you delve into that are subject to statute also in terms of the wording and our obligation, if they are not referenced, that would be maybe some kind of a symbol or something that, or just a CRS after it. But
Sure.
okay, that's it for
Sure.
me.
Okay. So, so the beginning really is just an introduction. It introduces the statute. I actually specifically reference the opening part of the statute in section 2. But before I get there, in section 1, what I'm really doing is kind of just this. Some of this is taken from your plan of development, and that's very purposeful. So this first section is meant to kind of incorporate the strategies around your plan of development, because ultimately any investment of the DDAs is subject to alignment, compliance, eligibility of the plan of development. So that's why it's so important. So I do kind of copy and paste those 5 core strategies.
Yeah.
And then I do reference supplementary and accompanying information. I mention, there's important paragraphs throughout this. So for example, the paragraph between supplementary information and policy goals, that really says,
Just
hey,
a quick
listen.
interjection. Would it be helpful if we pulled the document up, or is everybody good with, like, it looks like everybody has it in front of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got it
Yeah,
right.
I've got it open on the screen.
Excellent. Excellent. And so thank you, Sarah. I am
Nick-
currently on page 2 of the document. And that the paragraph that I'm about to reference basically says, hey, listen to the reader. And this is meant to be read by developers. Okay. So this is meant to be given to developers to say, hey, these are kind of the tools we're working with. Most of the time, this is a public front-facing document, and I encourage the DDA to share this with potential applicants, and I'll talk about those applicants in a moment. But what this middle paragraph basically says is, hey, listen, you have to comply with this document, but you also have to comply with all the other stuff that you normally need to comply with, right, in an entitlement process. So that is an important little paragraph for the developers that may read this document. The policy goals, this is not meant to be comprehensive. This section is actually meant to be built upon purposefully. So for me, these are just kind of best practices, and maybe I should call it best practices rather than policy goals now that I'm thinking about it. And for me, engaging, for example, that third bullet point, engaging that third party financial advisor, that on the surface may seem like a self-serving proposition for someone in my position. Ultimately, what that best practice is to make sure that you've got a third party, whether it be me or someone else, when it comes time to an actual project that you want to invest significant dollars on. This is beyond kind of just the budgeting as you go kind of dollars. This is for when you have something that says, hey, a developer comes to you and says, I want to build this. Well, you need to figure out how much increment that's going to generate. And they may have those numbers, but you to be third party checked. Okay. And I'll dive into that more, but those are best practices that I've pulled from. And again, they're not meant to be comprehensive. Going on to the third page,
Troy,
this,
I have a
yes,
quick question for you on that.
please.
On the first dot, partner/collaborate with any town or Grand County personnel. When I first read that, I was like, any town. So does that mean Fraser, Winter Park, Granby, Grand Lake?
No, I guess
Or
that's,
that town
yeah.
of Fraser? So
No,
that,
that's
might-
probably a grammatical error because
yeah,
it's
so
not,
that might be clarified a little bit.
yeah,
Thank you.
you bet. Hold on, let me just write that note.
And I like the change to best practices
Okay.
personally. See what anybody else thinks.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's your all's document, so I'm gonna put stuff in, and if you guys don't like it, please let me know. First bullet point. Great. Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So I'm now on page 3 of the document. If you're in PDF, it's page 5. And again, I do copy and paste this opening paragraph from the statute. And I think it's just a good summary. It's one of the more clear parts of the DDA statute that really says kind of what you're supposed to be as a DDA. And I think this is meant to be just more of a reminder for you all and more of a reference. As was just commented, I do bullet point some of what I think are powers of note or authorities of note that you should all be aware of. Okay, so one thing, for example, is it's a little past the middle mark of the bullet points. The DDA may acquire property. This is a power that is little known among DDAs, but some DDAs actually exercise this power to great success. So I just want to remind folks, the readers, of what your abilities and capabilities are under this statute. And because the statute does change from time to time, I do say, hey, please reference that section for the complete statute.
Another
And
question
so,
for you.
yes, please.
On dot number 1, 2, 3 at the end, the DDA has no tax power. The town can impose on CA. So it sounds like you're going to write
Oh,
in there.
impose on, yeah,
Okay.
that's a good catch. Thank you. I
You're
don't know
welcome.
what happened there because I haven't touched that bullet point for a while. So I
Okay.
will be sure to, I must have messed with it. All right. So that
All
is the third point. And that is, again, more meant to let you guys know, again, what's available to you. So what that bullet point's basically supposed to say is the DDA itself has no taxing power. If it so chooses, it may go to voters for that authority via the town. The town actually levies that on the DDA's behalf when that has voter approval. That's obviously not applicable in this case, but again, for me, it's an important authority and power that you guys do have under the statute.
Gotcha. Good.
And again, it's something you can go to voters down the road for, should that be appropriate and or necessary. So Section 3, we're starting to get into the meat of the document, okay? And this is all kind of written by me. This isn't really copy and pasted from anything. This is based on my public finance investment banking experience and specifically my experience working with DDAs. I will say there are differences in some of the practices for DDAs. What I'm trying to do is just in this section is inform you all kind of on the revenues and how they may be spent, okay? And so those orange headings are the principal ways that you're going to be investing your dollars, okay? So you've got cash flow funding, okay? And regardless of the mechanics of how that works, and I'll talk about that, this is effectively the money that you guys are budgeting on an annual basis, okay? And it's important to think of these dollars, even in years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, that these are dollars being invested in your future. So that's why, for me, for example, I'm thrilled that you and the town are collaborating on, for example, Sarah's position, because for me, ultimately, that leadership position is worth its weight in gold in terms of investing or partnering for that position. Cash flow, excuse me, yeah, your budget, actually, I'll touch on that in a second. The principal way that you're going to affect projects of substantial dollars, I'm thinking well beyond, your budget now. This is a capital project. You've got a developer coming to you. They'd like a reimbursement. They have to apply for that reimbursement, which we'll talk about. And this is just kind of an introduction to the concept, okay? And I use some words in very particularly for eligible projects, okay? So that the reader understands that, hey, this money isn't just an open checkbook. It's money that you have to apply for and you have to qualify for, okay? And most importantly, the development slash redevelopment, because sometimes it's a new development or sometimes it's a redevelopment of an existing property, and that reimbursement agreement. This is going to be one of your safest, most highly risk managed ways to invest money. And here's why. It's performance based, okay? You're not writing a check to a developer until that performance has been met, okay? And I'll get into the details of that, but I conceptualize the concept. Basically, the project has to be complete. It has to be, occupied, or it has to have a certificate of occupancy in order for those performance milestones to be met. Okay, if the performance milestones are met and the increment doesn't come in, sorry, developer. So the reimbursement development, or excuse me, agreement is the most secure way to invest your dollars, because you're not paying out a dollar until they perform. So it's basically a reimbursement. The last big category, and I do spend a lot of time on borrowing, and because it's a little more complicated of a concept. I reference the statute again. I reference your voter approved debt authorization. Okay. And for me, the bonds are a little more risky in terms of um, there's a little more risk to the DDA, and I'll go into that. But borrowing is a contractual obligation, so and so is a reimbursement agreement. But this is, you're now borrowing money, okay, for a project that maybe has been built, maybe you're providing construction dollars. I'll get into that nuance in a little bit, but there's a lot more to borrowing and to, hey, how do we know we're getting a really good deal? When do we borrow? This really kind of sets the stage for that. DDAs do borrow, but it's pretty infrequent, okay, in terms of a bonding effort, okay? Most of the time, you're going to be working on reimbursement agreements, but you could have a catalytic project, a large project that will generate a lot of increment to ensure that, one, a bond issue is repaid, and to have enough left over, right? You don't want to bond 100% of the increment from one project. I would never counsel you to do that. And what this section is, it really talks about why, okay? And so for me, I think the really important section to point out, it's all important in my opinion, but page 5, bottom of page 5.
Hey, Troy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before you move to that, I just want to
Sure.
make sure that my understanding is clear.
Please.
So if the DDA were to choose to allocate some portion of our funding, say 1%, to a collective interest, like, oh, I don't know, an art center, would that be under the pay-go cash flow funding category?
So that's an excellent question. And you are jumping ahead in terms of concept, but that's completely okay because it's a very important one. Okay. So an art center is a community asset, okay, in my opinion, and one that I totally see the value in. Okay. So I want to get that out in front. But as your financial advisor, I have to make sure that it's a worthy investment for you. And how do I do that? Well, the first question, which points to the bottom of page 5 or page 7 in the PDF reader, is there an existing revenue stream available to support that investment? And Steve, the reason why we're asking this question, not just on a commercial private development, but also on an art center project, is an art center project won't develop a new revenue source by itself. Okay. And so we need to make sure, is there development going, well, you're not going to get, the art center isn't going to be taxed, right? Or is it going to be a private art center?
Correct. But then,
Yeah.
I'm not really, frankly, interested in debating the veracity of it at this point. I'm just
no.
trying to understand
Yeah.
the structure of
Sure.
page,
Yeah.
whatever it was, page 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Because presumably we would only do that if something like an art center was going to draw enough business to the community to make it worthwhile. And that's a debate for a different day. I'm just
Sure.
trying to figure out how it fits into your document.
Sure.
The DDA is allowed to hold events, right? So then you could make it a revenue source by allocating, time every year to have events there that benefit the DDA, correct?
Yes. This is all correct, and you guys are all correct. I'm trying to draw a line in that if there is just an art center on its own and there's nothing else around it generating revenue, and if you don't have the revenue coming in, then obviously you can't contribute. If there's an existing source, great, yes, and I can kind of add to it. I guess to answer your question simply, Steve, it would be in your pay go. Okay. And I'll talk about that in more detail because I actually believe that you should start setting aside money to build a fund balance. So I conceptualize that concept because that's where I would see an investment like that come from is your pay go dollars. If you know it's a project that's coming that would support an existing development, that's a great way to start putting some money away in a fund balance assignment. So I'll touch on that subject. But ultimately, when you guys are looking at a request, whether it be a large event, whether it be a capital project, you have to first look at your revenue stream, your existing revenue stream. You have to look at the revenue stream.
Of course.
Right.
We're not we're not going to spend money we don't have.
Right. But for me, it's helpful to conceptualize these very kind of rational approaches because I guess not everyone looks at them the same way you do, Steve. So I just want to be as thorough as possible in this to make sure that you guys are thinking about these investment rights. Again, I haven't had a DDA that's gotten TIF in its very first year. So you guys are off to a raging start. And so, yes, for me, some of this may seem a little too simplistic, but I think it makes sense as part of the overall document. Okay, so when you're coming to borrow, okay, you have to obviously analyze the revenue stream as we just discussed, but the interest rate will obviously determine how much money you can get out of that bond issue. The higher the interest rate, the lower principal that you can get out of a revenue stream. Okay, the longer the prepayment term, the more principal you can get out of a revenue stream. The shorter a repayment term, the less principal you can get out of it. And these are just very simple kind of financing concepts, but these are good. This is good information to have when that occasion arises because you'll know the right questions to ask. Okay. And this part of this policy really tries to inform you why are you getting the interest rate you're getting. Okay. And so I won't spend a lot of time on that unless there is specific questions about borrowing. But because it's going to be less of an occasion than maybe a reimbursement agreement, I think we can spend more time on the reimbursement agreement. And so Section 4, I'm now on page 9 of the reader. I'm on page 7 of the document itself. And this is kind of the gambit, right? This is actually taking the concepts discussed, in the first section, and it's in the same order in this section, but this is now starting to put a little more teeth in what you're going to want to do as you're spending these dollars in these different buckets or in these different methods. Okay. And so for me, the beginning of the tax increment policy just kind of reminds and contextualizes the fiduciary duty that the DDA has. Okay. You don't have taxing authority. You're not levying via the town and mill levy. You are relying solely on tax increment dollars. And so those dollars can fluctuate significantly year to year. And as I've told you in the past, and I'll remind you now again, most of your new increment, your incremental value, and therefore your incremental property tax revenue will come from new construction. Okay. And so that's in the early years. Okay. When a project does come in, like let's say we've got, I should know this off the top of my head, Sarah, $63,000, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this tries to conceptualize, listen, you wouldn't spend 90% of that on one program or one particular budgeted item, okay? What this section of the policy is trying to say is, as your revenue's coming in, you have to keep a portion of that in to create operational sustainability and programming, okay? In the early years, you're going to want base hits, doubles, occasional triple, those small successes with programming and small capital projects, excuse me, are so incredibly important to building momentum. Okay. Now you guys might get a reimbursement request at the end of year 2 next year. Perhaps you don't. But we can address that. Tell you is, hey, you guys have a pot of money that is difficult to kind of project on an annual basis, absent of new construction. You have to keep in the early years the large majority of your revenues to operations, management and administration. And if you're going to look at your budget in the early years from a global perspective, you're going to be kind of administratively heavy in terms of your budget. That's okay. As I said earlier, this is an investment in kind of foundational work for the DDA. Okay. This is getting operational, getting some programming started. I love the fact that you guys are going to be administering that grant program, because for me, that's going to get you really into the mindset for evaluating projects of your own down the road. Okay. Granted, the criteria and the eligibility might be a little different between the town program and what you all will do eventually, but it gets you in that mindset of, hey, thinking about what boxes it needs to check. Okay, so again, as I just covered for the PAYGO cash flow funding, I've seen clients work with this funding in different ways. Some clients and some DDAs use a line of credit concept with their partnering municipality. Some DDAs, some of my clients receive their funds directly in their own bank accounts. Either way, it works, and these concepts all remain the same, okay, regardless of kind of the actual mechanism. And so in these early years, you're going to want to prioritize operations. You're going to want to continue to leverage grant opportunities. So anytime, you see something underlined, italicized, those are important concepts. And I'll touch on the exceptions in a moment. But for example, at the end of the opening paragraph under PAYGO cash flow spending, I underwrite bold and italicize shall. So that is really saying, all right, these are your policies that you're going to institute. And they're meant to be purposefully flexible, okay? Because revenues change, circumstances change. If you guys want more specificity, I'm happy to add it where you think it should be. But I do kind of draft this document purposefully flexible. I do touch on the percentages that you kind of want to retain or think about retaining later in the document. And then on the top of page 10, I kind of really memorialize this goal of setting aside some portion as a reserve. Okay, we set aside, I think, something like 5 or 10% this year. That's totally appropriate at this stage. You shouldn't be stockpiling cash. You should be finding ways to kind of disseminate those funds as much as possible to get that programming started, to get that foundational operations on board. And then as tax increment grows, you'll want to consider things like grant programming. And so I have a section that can be copied and pasted down the road when you're ready to implement a grant program. I just think at this point, you don't really have the funds to support that. And I wanted to have the document be something that is workable for you right now. I could have a section on the the grant program, but you're not really at a point where you can implement it. So I don't know how helpful that would be. But I
Right.
do, yeah,
Sorry to interrupt. So you
No.
did mention in the document that as tax increment grows, the authority may expand programming to include, and you mentioned a small grant or loan program. And it kind of trails off there. Was that intentional then? So an application will include ...
Wondering about that too.
Ha! That's funny. Okay. I know what I did there. I meant to remove the rest of that sentence, so it wasn't supposed to start because I was just supposed to remove that. So basically, if you guys want the concept of a grant program put in, I would put that in, and I would include the application that I've developed as well. So I can do that if the board so desires. That I'm at your direction and disposal.
I think we should, just because of how we structured the budget for next year.
Okay.
I envision that being a few people asking for a few $1,000 to do
Yeah.
improvements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
So,
All right.
yeah, I'm assuming on that too, there's 3 different applications. Kind of.
Yeah.
There was one, I'm not sure if it's in here, but you talked about small projects, large projects, and bonding or something. Anyway.
Yeah. So I'm going to go through basically the scoring matrix shouldn't deviate that much based on the nature of how you're spending the money. Okay. Ultimately, when you're disseminating a grant, a loan, when you're disseminating a capital contribution to a project, they still all have to kind of meet some of these base guidelines in terms of, the plan of development statute, that kind of stuff. So the application will differ in the amount of information it requires from each applicant.
Yeah.
So I
You
don't
do have a
want you to
variety,
have 3 applications. That seems a little inefficient to me. I prefer you have 1 application that can be used in multiple ways. And then, for example, a grant might have 1 set of requirements, and then a reimbursement would have more, and then a bond would have even more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Now,
Okay.
along that lines, and you're going to be moving into this, that application requirements, it's wonderful. They're very detailed, but if we've got somebody that's just wondering if it's something that we'll consider, is there a shortcut for them to evaluate, or can they do it themselves with the scoring matrix just by looking at it to make their own decision? Well, I'll probably fit, but everybody's a project.
Yeah, so it's an excellent question.
It's a
Okay.
lot of work putting
And
together all that information, which is good.
yeah,
But if we're gonna say, no, it doesn't fit. It's not a
Well, and
priority
just to-
for us at this time.
It's like you've been through it before.
Sarah?
Just to add to that, one of the conversations we've had, Troy, no decisions have been made, but as we were talking about the budget and what budget money could potentially go towards, the DDA will be helping to make recommendations to the Board of Trustees regarding the town's business
Yep.
enhancement grant, which is for
Yep.
facades, exterior improvements. The one piece that's a little potentially tricky to navigate is those applications are open to people both within and outside of the DDA boundary. And so in terms of thinking about evaluation criteria, I've kind of gone back and forth in my head on exactly what that looks like, but I think they have to kind of be asked to view those under the town's evaluation criteria to be
Right.
fair to ones that are both within and without. But one possible idea was that, if there was a business that really just couldn't put up the match or had a project within the DDA, that the DDA thought was a beneficial project, potentially they could offer some supplemental funds And that could have a slightly different set of criteria for evaluation than what the town's business enhancement grant might have.
Right. So,
And I think there'd be a lot of overlap in that criteria, but so I was
Yes.
thinking of the matrix you provided and how much that applies or doesn't apply. But again, these are smaller versus a developer looking for a reimbursement agreement that, you know, would be a significant pot of money. This, you know, we're talking a few thousand maybe.
yeah, let's let me jump ahead here. Because this is a really good question, and the reason why you guys can hear me thinking is that I made the document so that it needs, so that any spending really needs to comply with where the business spirit, where business spirit and creativity are intertwined, where mountain dreams are within our means, where the river flows through the nature's heart, where the river journey, where every journey is connected, where Fraser's pride comes alive. Those are the areas that you kind of need to grade the larger projects, the grants, the loans, okay? And those, I try to really more simplify those concepts in the first box of the scoring matrix, okay? And I don't have immediate answers for you. We can all brainstorm about it, but when you look at the matrix, okay? So we're going to have to, you know, have the plan of development next to us as we score vibrancy, local charm, and business support, which is that first category. Okay. So some of this is going to be subjective or qualitative and not quantitative. Okay. And we have to be comfortable with that. Okay. And if you guys, it sounds like someone's, and I'm sorry, I can't see who's speaking when, so forgive me, but, you know, it sounds like someone's used to reviewing, you know, grant requests and stuff like that. So if there's anything that needs to be more specific, for me, I start general and flexible. If you guys want me to get more specific, I can. But it's this very reason that you brought up that I want this document to be flexible, okay?
Leaving some gray areas like that is good, actually,
Yeah.
because that leaves you the right to deny.
Yes.
And people get really upset when they have exactly the wording that you need there and you say no. So that does allow us to kind of, have less, say that's not what we want,
Sure.
even if it's kind of down the middle and we just don't have the money for it or something.
That was the one thing I was gonna bring up is just capital availability.
But it is a poem. at the
I
moment.
mean, that's the first one.
It is.
That's why I mentioned revenue stream. We always have to think about our revenue stream first.
Yeah. You can damn near memorize that as a poem.
Okay.
You know, for me, these aren't necessarily things.
Uh-oh, you're frozen.
You're frozen,
Yep.
Troy.
There you go. He's
Oh.
back. Woo!
Sorry. Oh, of course, my internet's unstable here.
Yeah,
I'll
of
take
course.
my video off for a second just so I can finish my comment here. For me, you know, a lot of this is, you know, how do you score some of these categories 1 to 5? Okay. Maybe we have scoring that just says either meets or doesn't meet. We don't have to have a scoring. A scoring helps kind of start to narrow down projects. So that's why I put it in there. Okay. But, you know, some projects might not do one of these. It may not support one of these categories. One project might support all 5, and then that helps make the decision a little more easier, right? The more boxes a project checks off, the more it's meant to kind of qualify in your minds. Okay.
That makes sense. So an applicant could look at this themselves.
Correct?
and kind of
Yeah.
plug their own thing into it, say, well, is this worth my time to?
Well, that's the other thing we
Make
talk
it-
about is providing as much as we can so people know there's a process and
Yeah.
don't worry about if it's not fair,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, the
And
average to write a
yeah,
grant for those local grants is like 10 days or something at least.
I know,
It takes a
I used
ton
to
of
write grants, it
hours,
takes a long
if
time.
not.
but, yeah, there's a lot of information.
well, and yeah, and when it comes to information, you know, I'm not intending for the application requirements to be overly burdensome. What I want to make sure is that you all feel you have enough information in your hands to make the most informed decision with the information you have available. So that's really my goal here, okay?
Right.
You know, when it comes to larger development type of projects, yeah, I think it's important that the developer tell you they have the money to finish the project. So that's one very specific requirement, right? If they want, you know, $2 million out of an $8 million increment project, and those are just made up numbers. They need to be able to, one, demonstrate that they actually need the $2 million. Now, they can demonstrate they need it. They just have to be able to install the improvements before they get reimbursed for it. So, you know, the requirements are really meant to be more stringent the bigger, the more complicated the project, I guess is the simplest way to put it. You know, even with the grant program that's yours, not the town's, you know, for me, still really important when you do a grant program that the grantee has the means to finish the project, or maybe it's a reimbursement grant. We can talk about those different mechanisms. I think for me, the biggest risk to a DDA is outlaying a large sum, whether it be grant, loan, whatever, and the project not come to fruition. So that's one of my principal concerns, is that that doesn't happen. So that's kind of the lens I'm going to be looking through. I love art centers. I believe they are community assets, but I have to also help you guys do the math to make sure it makes sense for the organization. Okay, I'm almost done. So, okay, so talking
Page number,
in the,
please.
I'm sorry?
Page number, please.
Yes.
Huh?
I'm on page 8, the reimbursement agreements.
Great.
Again, this is giving you more specifics. I underline and italicize and bold requires. These are some of the mechanisms that you will use to risk manage that investment. Okay. As I said before, in the early years, you need to retain a larger percentage of the projected revenues than you will have to later on in your life cycle. You will always, let me be more positive, you will always put a not to exceed dollar amount or not to exceed time period in your reimbursement agreements. Okay. So as I talked about earlier, okay, this is all risk managing your monies. Okay. So you want to make sure that you agree to a dollar amount that's not to be exceeded, and you agree to a period of time. So if that dollar amount or that time, or if the dollar amount's not reached or the time has been exceeded and that full amount has not come to fruition, you do not owe that full amount. Okay. Each party goes into that agreement, reimbursement agreement, understanding that if the increment comes, you will be paid. If it doesn't, you won't, or you'll be paid on a pro rata basis. Okay. So I don't want you guys to sign a reimbursement agreement for $2 million over 8 years. And
Uh-oh, you stopped again.
in that agreement, you're not collecting the increment you thought you would, okay? You're protected.
Okay.
That is what my other principal job is, to protect your funds and to protect you guys. So that's really, really important to me, that section, okay?
Question,
Yes.
please, and this is Katie. The
Hi, Katie.
the last paragraph on page 8, you talk about construction completion and or project stabilization.
Yes.
I don't understand what that means. Does other
Okay.
people?
No, I should add, nope, that's a really good point. I should add a parenthetical there.
Okay.
And
You can add it later.
project, yeah, and I will, project stabilization. Now this is an option. It is not a requirement, but basically what that says is you've got, let's say condo units, okay? Let's say there are 8 of them. Okay, and you have a reimbursement agreement for a portion of the property tax increment generated from those units. You could say, hey, your completion milestone is certificate of occupancy, or your project milestone is actually getting people into those units. So people in the units is stabilization.
Hmm.
That means people have either bought the units or are paying rent on the units.
Okay.
And again, that's a risk factor that you guys have the option to institute in an agreement or not. Okay. A developer might say that's not fair, and they might give reasoning, and you might say, okay, that's fine. We don't need it. We'll do it at CO instead of project
Okay.
stabilization.
Thank you.
And again, that's a call. And I love that you brought this up, because for me, this all depends on your degree of confidence in the developer.
Mhm.
So that's why I mentioned that small segment, but it's a very important segment. So I'm glad you caught that.
Troy, another question about developer agreements.
Yes.
When I was reading this, it made me question if my understanding of how these typically work are correct. So the way I have understood, envisioned them is they build condo units, commercial, whatever it is. They have an agreement to get a certain amount of the increment that the DDA is due to get back, goes back to the developer. And they may get that increment. Would be a percentage of the increment for X amount of time up to a maximum of X amount. Is that
Yes.
the way they typically work? Because when I was reading this,
So-
it sounded more like maybe you'd get a lump sum at certificate of occupancy, another lump sum a year later kind of thing.
Yeah, I thought, so lump sum is only going to be available to you if the dollars become available, right? Most of the reimbursement agreements are repaid in installments, okay, until you reach a dollar amount, okay?
Okay.
And so development agreements, Sarah, range quite significantly. And you know this in your position with the town. You know, you could have a development agreement with a sales tax incentive, with a town or county property tax incentive. These are principally around the concept of tax increment reimbursement. And so this might be in addition to another development agreement that exists in terms of with a town or with another local jurisdiction. These are agreements, you know, kind of just in the silo of DDA. So, and these are just a very general way of how I've seen them drafted. They can get significantly more complicated. And so for me, I am trying to make a very kind of somewhat nuanced and potentially very complicated concept a little more simple. But yeah, for me, it's easy for everyone to understand. There's a performance that has to be met, and you know the developer will get the dollars upon that performance based on the availability of those dollars. And so, did I answer your question? I'm not sure I
Kind
did.
of. So it sounds like maybe the agreement is for, 50,000 on X date, 50,000 on X date, $50,000 on X date, but those
Oh,
amounts have in
oh, I
part
see.
come up
Oh, I
based
see.
on what you think is coming in based on increment, and that increment has to actually come in to get.
Yeah, I would never agree to specific, maybe there will be kind of minimal dollar milestones, which I've seen. Um, for me, it's more of if the revenue's in, and so the contract will basically say, hey, we have operations we need to fund with these dollars. So you won't get paid your reimbursement until after we pay for our budget. So they will understand that they have to build the project to generate the revenue. And if some external force impacts the amount of that revenue and it's not contemplated in the document, then that developer doesn't get paid out. So for
That revenue
me,
being the tax increment
yes,
from the project.
yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, you might have like a dollar amount, but it won't be maybe year one after occupancy. It might be 3 years after occupancy. Yes, you developer X should have $300,000 by then. But guess what? If they don't, you're not in violation of the agreement. Because again, these dollars are coming in. You have to hold some back for your operations, and they get what's left from that project,
Right.
right? Right. So I don't want them having access to all of your revenue. I want them having access only to the revenue from that project, if possible. So,
And just to continue to help my understanding here, this is why we wouldn't have a developer agreement with the art center because they're tax exempt. But we could have more of a pay as you go model where we contribute money to the art center.
correct. Correct. So let's say there's a development going around the art center, okay, that would push off tax increment, and who would put in the art center? Would it be the municipality of the town?
No, it's nonprofit.
It's a
Nonprofit.
The
Okay,
nonprofit.
thank you.
not-for-profit.
Okay. So, yeah,
The town
then
has
it,
deeded land to the nonprofit for
that's
the art
right.
center.
That's right. Okay. So then they would need to make a formal request to you, and then you would say, and if you want to memorialize it in an MOU and an LOI, something like that, where you can basically say, hey, upon availability of funds, that literally has to be the first part of the sentence, we can, we'll grant X per year.
Yeah.
And that way, you guys are showing support of a very important project because I truly believe that. Um, and and so for me, that way you're showing commitment and you're not putting yourself in a corner if the revenues don't show up.
Yeah, Troy, on that point, as you might imagine, we've been benchmarking other communities. And one of the models that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think these are involved debates, but I'm just trying to understand if it's possible under these documents. But one of the models that makes a lot of sense to me is communities have allocated a small percentage, like 1% of future revenues under a thing like DDA to their community arts centers. And that protects the community in the sense that if there's no revenue, there's no allocation. And it gives the not-for-profits that run these centers demonstrable evidence that they're supporting the community. And over time, as revenues grow, it's meaningful money. Is that something that could be accommodated the way you've got this written?
Yes.
Good.
Thanks.
I like the percentage idea too. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, that just makes tons of sense to me.
Mhm.
Yeah. Again, you posited it in the right way, Steve, as long as it's not something that's a firm contractual agreement, it's upon available. I love it.
Yeah, so
I
do
love
I.
it. And so for me, Yeah, that's the only thing that I just worry about. Just don't, set an annual obligation that you can't meet.
Yeah,
But that
yeah,
sounds great.
and frankly, I have no interest in saddling the town with a expectation and commitment that is unreasonable.
Yeah.
I'll let other people in the community do that.
Yeah, for me, that would be your budgeted funding, Steve. For me, and as long as it complies with the plan of development, and as long as you can demonstrate those dollars are spent to entities in your boundaries, you're all good. You're all good.
Right.
All right. I am now on page 9. I go into a great deal of nuance and detail about bond issues. I think they're incredibly important tools when it's appropriate to use them. I saddle you with all this detail because I want you to understand like how these things work, and so that when it comes time to um, issuing a bond, you feel well informed as a board. Again, for me, I volunteer my time around education on these tools. I'm incredibly passionate about being informed and being educated and making informed decisions. And so I go through a lot of topics that you won't think about in your day-to-day DDA lives. But when it does come time, these are really important concepts to understand. Okay. So one thing that I get on my high horse about, okay, is that when it comes time to issue bonds, okay, the town is the issuer. You are the obligor. Okay. I don't think I actually use that word because it's a terrible word, but it's the word we use in public finance. Okay.
Yeah.
So the town is the issuer, you're the obligor in these circumstances. Okay. So that means you're responsible for the debt repayment. The town is not. Okay. So because I'm an investment banker by trade, okay, I believe that you all should have, if not 50%, 55% say in who's going to sell your bonds or place your bonds. Okay. Because ultimately, the town is the issuer, so that's who the investment banker is going to be selling the bonds from. Okay. But ultimately, that investment banker is working for you. They're not working for the town because you want that investment banker to get you the lowest cost of borrowing. The town doesn't care. No offense, Sarah, town representative. Like, it's not their debt, it's yours. So for me, you need to have a say in who you're going to work with. Okay. And I say this on a high horse because people don't take the time to meet in an interview format investment bankers enough. They don't do it enough, in my opinion. Okay. You want to kind of understand who you're working with, and hopefully you kind of like them as a person. I always think that's kind of important when working with someone. You don't have to be best friends with them, but you want to make sure that you know the person and that they care. Okay. Because I care. I'm very prideful in kind of the effort and time I put into things. And so I want your investment banker to do that. Now, let's stop here. All right. Since I'm your financial advisor, I can't be your banker too. The SEC forbids it because I have a different duty to you in my role. Okay. An investment banker, they work with you in a commercial arm's length transaction. That means they don't have your best interest in mind. So, if I'm around and still working with you wonderful people when it comes time to do a bond, I can certainly help in the evaluation of underwriters or placement agents in, what you want to look for. But I touch on a lot of the concepts that you want to look for, right? So let's say we have and I'll be brief with this anecdote. Let's say you have a $2 million bond. And let's say we've approved it, you're moving forward. You're not going to get $2 million from that bond. Okay. If you issue $2 million of debt, you're not going to get $2 million worth of proceeds. You're going to get something less than that. You're going to have to pay for upfront costs, of course, closing costs, just like you have with the mortgage. But I mentioned this concept of a debt service reserve. You can call it a rainy day fund, okay? But that's money that's funded from the bond that sits in an account that protects the investors in case revenues don't come in as planned. It's called a debt service reserve because you can dip into it to help pay debt service, i.e., principal and interest. So that's an important concept for you to know. And I actually give you the math because 10%, maybe a little more, of that $2 million is going to be stuck in a glorified savings account. So now you're looking at 1.8 million of proceeds. Cost of issuance shouldn't be more than 3 to 5% of your par amount. And, so let's call it $100,000. So now you've got $1.7 million of proceeds. Those are important concepts for you to know because for me, debt service reserves aren't something that everyone thinks about. If you issue a $2 million bond, of course you get $2 million back. Doesn't always work that way. And I think that's important information for you all to know. And so let's see here. Let's dive into, section 5. I'm on 13. We've discussed a lot of these issues. As I said, the requirements are going to increase, and I have a very alone bullet point there in the middle of the page that's going to bother me.
Yeah.
Okay, bullet point. Sorry, just writing a quick note. And so, things like, hey, is a project properly insured? Yes, maybe based on some of your day jobs, you think about those things. I think it's really important to memorialize. I conceptualize that applicants, i.e. developers or grant applicants, I encourage them to start a dialogue with you all, okay? We talked earlier about, hey, what if someone doesn't really know if their project fits? Well, I suggest they look through the policy, look through the plan of development, and open a conversation, either with perhaps Sarah or, make a presentation to the board and something like that. Just for me, I believe it's important for you all to get to know the applicants, understand their projects really, really well, and understand kind of what you think you'll need from those applicants. And so on the next page, the required documentation, again, this is meant to be flexible, but some things I'm, a little more, I guess, strict on, right? So for me, there has to be some alignment with the plan of development. I mean, I think that's kind of one of your base requirements. Now, on how it's written, there should be plenty of flexibility to approve most, if not all, projects. Okay. There are some things that, I do want you staying away from, and I hopefully touch on those. I think that might have been one section I wanted to add. Funding guidance. Yes, hold on. Yeah, so the funding guidance on the following page is really meant to be very flexible. For me, anything that's of public benefit is the easiest kind of umbrella for you all to kind of. So for me, a new facade is absolutely a public benefit. New sidewalk, new lighting, new fire suppression system. Okay. Anything that improves the safety of the public or, there are other parts of the statute. You are preventing the oncoming of blight. You don't have any blight standards, which is the great thing about DDAs. But a facade could easily go under preventing, blighting conditions. You don't have to prove that blight conditions exist. The statute just clearly says you are meant to prevent blighting conditions. So for me, facade right there. So, when, you can't pay for, let's say there's a development with parking stalls underneath ground, below grade, and, 50% of those stalls are private, 50% are public. You can only contribute to the ones that are public, not to the private ones. So things like that. And I meant to keep this very simplistic and open. Um, I do think I have an explicit, we're not paying permitting fees and stuff like that. Things that get constructed and improved are generally what we're going to invest in on a project side. This does not include your programming, beautification, placemaking. That's all kind of pay-as-you-go money. I'm talking about more project dollars when looking at these requirements and eligibility.
Troy,
gonna
one clarification, and I believe we talked about this somewhat in depth back when we were on the phone with Bill and Butler Snow and everybody, but we have the debt authorization for up to 25 million, the voter approval. Obviously, if we take out bonds, that would count against that 25 million. But your interpretation is pay as you go does not count against that 25, and that this is the real part I want to ask you about, that developer agreements, if they are written correctly, also do not count against that 25 million. Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay. So this is interpretive. Okay. You see this probably not quite as much in municipalities, but you see different towns operate in slightly different ways, particularly with interfund transfers. I see a lot of different practices from town to town, city to city. DDAs, the statutes are, written in a way where it's been interpreted in a different ways. So, the most flexible, or I guess, more liberal interpretation is that, yeah, pay-as-you-go dollars do not count against your debt limit. This is more a practical interpretation because you don't have a mill levy. So how are you supposed to operate? And so for me, the argument's quite simple, that, paying staff is an operating expense. It's not a capital expense. Okay. So for me, debt is taken out for a capital expense. Now, a reimbursement agreement, as Sarah touched on, it can be written two ways. It can be written that basically says, all right, money comes in and we've funded our budget. We're obligated to send you these funds under the agreement. The slight variation to the second way to write these agreements is that you write them with a clause, an appropriation clause, that basically says your payments, developer, under this reimbursement agreement are subject to annual appropriation. Excuse me. That means that it is the board's decision during its budget cycle whether or not to actually put that reimbursement payment on its budget for the following year. The appropriation language isn't meant to make you think that you're not going to pay your developer. It is literally a way around counting against your debt limit. That's it. So if we include one or two sentences in your reimbursement agreements, I've heard, pretty universally from several attorneys that that does not count against your debt limit. Now, you might come across a developer that isn't comfortable with the appropriation language, but here's the thing, y'all. Here's the dirty little secret. It's still a performance-based contractual obligation. So what rationally or practically would you get out of not paying a developer if the funds are there, right? And they're available to pay the developer? You're going to do that. It's just that language allows you more planning and management flexibility with your debt authorization.
So in that example, Troy, a developer still has the legal right to those funds since it's a performance-based obligation.
Well, that's exactly
With that
right.
language.
And I'm sorry, who's speaking?
Sorry, this is Greg Beckler.
Hi, Greg. Greg, you're absolutely right. They'll basically say, hey, we've met our performance under this contract. You owe us money. So yeah, that's
Mhm.
right. There's again, that's why you would never not pay them.
Yeah.
It's literally, and this is all born out of Tabor.
Mhm.
That's it. This is all, I mean, that's why we have lease purchase financing on the municipal and county level in Colorado, so that we can build infrastructure with appropriation leases. So it's a very common lease purchasing concept, and we use that concept in these reimbursement agreements to avoid counting against your debt.
I know we'll be looking at the actual agreements later because we're not there yet. But in
Right.
those, I'm assuming that there's language that would protect the DDA from, in terms of litigation and costs
Oh.
for the litigation.
Oh, yeah.
Good. Okay,
Oh,
good.
yeah. And I'm happy to memorialize that. And perhaps that's maybe a blind spot of mine, Katie, if it was Katie that just said that, because for me, yes, that's kind of like, that's standard language in my book. Indemnity and litigation protection clauses. That's standard operating protocol. And yeah, you're good
It's
there.
just a little early. We're not looking at those documents yet.
Right. But yeah, you'll have all those protections. Here, let me just tell you, even if you were to do a bond issue, okay, let's use that $2 million example, and you get that $1.7 million in the bank. Okay. One, is that money reimbursing for a project that's already been done? Sure, it could be doing that. If it's money that's going into a new project, then I mention in this policy document that you need draw reviews, because that's your money, that 1.7 million. You want to make sure that money's getting spent when and where and how it's supposed to. So there's protection mechanisms put in there so that the developer that's building the project and maybe your money's going in, see, now construction risk is a really big thing for us, right? If we're using a bond to put into a new project that's being constructed, we're now right in the middle of that construction risk, because if that project doesn't get built, our bonds don't get repaid. So there's different risk management tools that you'll have to use with a bond than you will with a reimbursement agreement, because the reimbursement agreement by its very nature protects you.
Thank you.
And so I've been talking for a while now. You guys have been really kind to interrupt me, to allow me to drink water. But I don't want to touch on anything more other than one or two items. You guys probably already know about kind of the sunshine rules and laws and all that fun stuff. I always feel it's important. This is the only other section that's kind of copied and pasted from statute. But I do believe it's important that when it does come time to a big project that's high profile, you do want to think about a spokesperson, someone that speaks on the board's behalf, one voice instead of many, things like that. Don't be afraid to use executive session. Don't abuse it either. So I volunteer with DCI when I can. And one of my board member colleagues loved the story about going into a URA, which is basically a cousin of a DDA. And they said, hey, we have real trust issues. And Steve started asking questions, and they mentioned executive session. And Steve said, well, how often do you go into executive session? They said every single meeting. Well, you're not supposed to go into executive session every public meeting, all right? And so you don't want to think business is being done behind in dark, smoky rooms, but there are going to be times when negotiations will have to go to executive session, and that's permissible under Colorado statute. The last thing I'll touch on, and it's the only paragraph that's all underlined, italicized and bolded, is, if a developer comes to you with a request and they say, hey, we think this project projects $8 million and we've got $2 million of eligible stuff that you can reimburse us for, okay? You're not going to take them on face value. As I put in best practices on page 2 or page 1, you're going to want someone to verify those projections, okay? Don't pay for it, or if you do pay for it initially, you get reimbursed for it. And that's what this paragraph talks about. If the developer wants your money and they want to prove to you that the revenue stream will generate what it does, then they're going to pay for the third-party review, either up front or down the road. So for me, that's an important thing to really think about is you're the one with the money. They're going to want the money, and, making them pay 10 grand up to 15 grand to support their claim, that'll be fine. They'll be happy to pay the 15 or whatever it is. It's up to 15. We could make it up to 20. We could put it up to 30. For me, I think this is one part of your policy that's going to change over time. Okay. So, it just will. The retainage percentages will change over time, but hopefully you guys feel that this kind of gives you a lane to stay in. Okay. And that's really purposeful. All right. It does, rather than being on I-70 or 25 swerving, you're allowed to swerve in this lane a little bit. And I purposefully drafted it that way. So, I've written 6 notes. Going to be adding the grant section as the big one. And if there's anything else, I'm happy to hear you all out now and kind of talk about next steps.
I have another question.
Please.
On the top of page 14, that first sentence. It's the second sentence. Growth in tax increment leads to operations stabilizing and more investment opportunities. This growth likely necessitates the board consideration of percentages applied to the parameter above and or amending the parameters themselves. So I'm just wondering, percentage above what?
Right. So,
I guess that was just because
nope. Listen, I love this. Okay. I love this. So this is great. So that really touches on that 60 to 80% I mentioned. And maybe, I'm going to put that in a different section.
Maybe a way to clarify that.
Yeah, because basically what that's, and I might rewrite that sentence. It's a little confusing, but what that is meant to mean is, listen, all right, if you've got a project that scores, what are there 5 categories, 5 points, 25 points, that allows you to say, all right now we've got enough money for our budget. It says we need to retain 60 to 80%, but this project knocks it out of the park. It literally checks all the boxes. It allows you to say, all right, well, the policy says this, we're going to make an exception to the policy. And so, but I'll refine that, Katie, a little bit and draw attention back to those percentage thresholds so there's a clearer connection.
Thank you.
And Troy, I saw just a couple minor edits in different spots, so I'll just.
I hate those. I thought I went through the whole doc. All right.
A couple of them are like commas that are probably a matter of preference, but I'll send you what I got.
Okay, please. Yeah.
And Troy, forgive me if I missed this, but what is the process to amend this document going forward, and how difficult
Sure.
is that?
Sure. No, that's great. So once it's adopted, I like to poke you guys once a year. So I'll probably, I'd like to do it, maybe not during budget season, because I'd like kind of your attention on that. Maybe we do it at, June-ish. I don't know. And we kind of think about it. I typically look at these in the spring, early summer for my clients to see if there's any updates. And what I usually do is I'll amend the same document and apply a different color to the box on the cover page so that we know we can keep track of the different versions.
Spring would be good. Not
Okay.
summer. June and July, or July and August up here.
It is, yeah.
Too
Fair
much
enough.
going on.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
But
June.
aside from that
May.
regular cadence, if say we identify something and we
Oh,
go,
yes.
oops, how do we change that?
You direct me to make the change. The next board will have an amended policy to you.
And just typical to a majority vote and that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that seems good.
Yeah, and on that note, I did not prepare a resolution. I told Troy I had no idea if this was going to be a 15-minute or 2-hour discussion. So people have had great questions.
I've
I know
loved it.
I'm still learning a lot of this, so I've had a lot of questions. So I mean, I think we can make a motion if you'd like to approve it, as a working document that can be amended, or we can make some of those adjustments and changes that have been discussed and bring it back with a more formal resolution at our next meeting.
So,
If people
Sarah?
are feeling comfortable approving it. Yeah.
Does this adoptiveness have anything to do with our moving ahead with our increment through the county?
No.
Or we met all those obligations now? Other
Yeah,
than-
I mean, I guess I won't call it an internal document if it's meant to be shown to developers and whatnot. But it really is a working operational
Great.
policy document. Is that an accurate description?
Absolutely. One, I'm thrilled about the comments, regardless of how I hate making small mistakes or not finding them. But for me, I love it. So it means you're engaged, and that makes me happy.
And when you read through it, you know what you're talking about. When I
But
read through it, I'm like, oh, well, I'm not sure I know what he's talking about. So good.
Well, it's
Thank you.
important
Really
that
good
you-
work. It's really
All
good
right.
work.
Good. I want you guys to really use this, and if something comes up, but yeah, to Steve's point, yeah. So for example, that last paragraph I talked about, Steve, where the applicant needs to pay us up to a certain dollar amount. We just realized I changed that for a client 2 years ago when it was just too small of a dollar amount. We needed to increase it. So we did that within 1 or 2 board meetings. So pretty easy.
I did want to ask the group more specifically how they feel about the matrix, if this feels good as a starting point
Oh,
for kind of
yeah.
evaluating projects.
And
It's
that's all it
obviously
is.
a little nebulous, but
Yes. And I meant to be, I wanted this to be kind of the part where you guys probably do a little more drawing and filling it. These are areas where I've seen best practices. Nothing's drawn from anything else. I kind of went through them and thought, hey, if I were a DDA, but this section is certainly probably the section with the most freedom for you to do with it as you will.
and I'll just add, sorry, Greg, to cut you off, real
Go
quick.
ahead.
I know this has been a lot of information. There is no rush to approve this. So if we can talk about it, but then if people want to kind of chew on it and come back again, kind of for any part of the document, but specifically to the matrix and touch on it again when we meet in December, we can definitely do that.
Greg?
I was just gonna say, that was my comment earlier, was it's not clear to me, like it being I would just come to this webpage or this document and go to the scoring matrix and start looking at how my
Right.
project, I wouldn't read
Right.
a 20-page document, to be honest, as a developer. And just adding something that's clear here about fund availability. Um,
Oh, okay.
just to,
Yep, good
just to
point.
give us like an out.
I like it.
feel like, because it, I feel like
See,
from the developer perspective, I'd be like, oh, I got all fives, but I'm asking for
Got
10
it.
million bucks, and it's not something that's even a
Yeah.
possibility. So
Yeah.
just have
Yeah.
an out, a clear out for the board
it's
that's shown on the matrix.
it's a great comment. I say subject to funding availability throughout the document, except on this page. So for me, yeah,
I went
that's
straight to that page when you started talking.
Yeah.
No, but it's a great observation. So that will absolutely get changed.
Great, that's good. And that ties in with my shortcut for people to review.
Yeah,
They can plug themselves in there, and then that gives them the idea like, well,
yeah.
Well, yeah, and so I do think the financial considerations might be the only other box where I'll feel a little more strongly to kind of keep in, maybe not organizational impact staffing, or no, excuse me, organizational impact staffing maintenance. That's an important last box or line to consider, because hopefully when the first big project does come on and it does require a lot of staff time, there's a little more capacity for that. But that's really for the board members to keep in mind that it does take time to manage and oversee these projects and making sure that they're moving along slowly. So I'm glad Greg's comment came to light on this scoring matrix, because I think that was a line item I wanted to draw your attention to, is making sure, hey, is there actually staffing and operational capacity to oversee these projects? Or does that prompt you to ask the question for additional outside help?
all right, well, I'll move to move ahead with this as a working document.
I don't
With
think I'm
Troy.
ready to.
Okay.
approve it. I want to
Sure.
go through, I like a page of notes.
Okay,
If
okay.
that's okay, Sarah.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah,
anyone-
sorry, I didn't hear what you said, Lori.
Oh, sorry. I said, I don't think I'm ready to approve it.
Okay.
I want to review it a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, this isn't improving the document,
Well,
just
moving-
moving ahead.
Okay, well, moving ahead.
Yeah.
Is that what we're doing?
Just continuing to work with Troy on,
Okay.
developing this
I
document.
wanted to know if that's
We're
what we're
not
doing. Okay.
Yeah, not approving.
I
the
love to
document.
hear that there are notes on the document. That again, that's great. So for me, this is meant to work for you all. So I'm happy to field as many comments as you got for me. I love it, because for me, I've already seen 3 ways to improve this document. I'm actually going to include a new section based on Steve's suggestion about making commitments to important community causes, subject to funding availability from the pay-go section. So I'm going to include that. So for me, I'm over the moon, because you guys at least have seemed to take some care and initiative with it. There have been times where I've presented a policy and I didn't hear a question. So I'm really happy to hear it.
Grant stuff, right?
Yeah, grant stuff.
Yep, that's coming in.
Yeah,
Shows it
so
on
if we
it.
add that, and we can
Yeah.
look at it and then come with more notes
Yeah.
for December.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so continue to work on this document. Do we need to move to do that though?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Unless-
Are we able to share red lines via email?
That's what I was hoping to do, is do a red line. Is
Yeah.
that possible? Troy?
I don't know if you can-
Sure.
Right,
I mean, I want
Yeah, it's hard.
to,
Yeah, wondering if we do like a track change or red line copy.
Okay.
I'm wondering if we can do it like statutorily, is that?
Yeah, I don't.
Because that's
we can't-
content, it's
well,
not
it would
like,
be- We'd each do our own and send it to Sarah individually. We couldn't see each other's.
correct.
You know, we
Right.
discussed this when we were looking at, I think it was the bylaws. There was some other
Yeah, it was-
document.
was
And I
the
think the
bylaws.
idea is if they're minor edits, typos, things like that, you want to suggest, as long as you were not engaging in discussion through the comments, I think we're okay.
Okay.
Because it does make it a little easier versus me trying to merge 12 different versions of changes and get those to Troy. So I think if there's a Word document with some red lines, just make sure you're not, commenting
Okay.
back and
Yeah, so don't
forth
comment.
to each other, if that makes sense.
Right, your edits.
Okay, so how about I do this? How about I institute the changes that I've got in my notes in red line form? I'll get that out to Sarah, or what's the best way? Because for me, I want to make it
Sarah.
easier on Sarah. I'm happy to compile all the
No, I think
things.
you should
So
do this first.
do you want to send your comments and then have me send a red line, or should I send a red line and then you guys send me?
I vote that you send yours first because you could cover
Okay.
a lot of what we're thinking already.
Okay.
Save you time, probably.
Okay, sure.
And Troy, one last question. In terms of this matrix, if we were, say, getting 10 applications at once, 5 applications at once, then, we could sit around, score them based on this and kind of pick which projects to fund. With things like developer agreements, though, I imagine they're more going to be one-offs. And I wouldn't want them to need to meet like a total score because I don't even know what that would look like how stringently we're going to be grading these but what is kind of your vision of, we look at a project, we score it, then where do we go from there? Does that question make sense? Because we're not saying they need to have X number of points. We're not comparing
Right.
different projects at the same time. I don't think we should have a strict number, but I guess I'm just wondering if there's language that should be in there about how this matrix is used, or if I'm overthinking this.
No, you're not overthinking it. So, all right. Yeah, I'm gonna put this in there too. So basically,
Yeah.
I envision there being, because there's a staff of one, we have to be thoughtful about your time, Sarah. And so I'm envisioning potentially a subcommittee. If you're getting that many applications, I would suggest, and I'll now memorialize, a subcommittee to review the documentation, the scoring, and then maybe make a recommendation to the board. That's how I've seen it work in the past.
Okay.
All right. So for me, I think what I've seen my other clients use the scoring matrix in a variety of different ways. So for example, the financial component section becomes increasingly more important the larger the dollars, right? The more complicated the project, a developer reimbursement agreement. So for me, the scoring matrix is meant to be flexible and used in different ways for different applications. But I think what I should do is probably put that more in black and white so that the reader, particularly from a developer perspective, kind of understands that.
Right.
So I'll add that.
Yeah, and I imagine it will evolve, if we're getting one application every 10 years versus 10 applications a year, it'll be a different
Oh, yeah.
process or standard of criteria.
Yeah, and for me, certainly if you're talking about 25 grand, even next year for 26, that's something that should require some kind of board presentation at one point, right? Potentially.
Yeah.
So depending on, I leave it flexible because operationally, I'll let you kind of figure out what's the best way. Maybe not every project needs a specific board presentation, but certainly the bigger, the more important, the more nuanced, it's a requirement. So I'll memorialize some of that a little more clearly.
Okay.
Is there anything else?
All right, good job.
So yeah, thank you.
All right, and I
Great.
do want to make a motion because we're paying him
Oh,
to do this work.
sure.
So I'm just gonna say that, make a motion that we continue working with Troy on our tax increment investment policy.
Good second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank
Perfect,
you.
thank you.
Thank you. Excellent work today. Thank you so much, really from the bottom of my heart for being engaged, thoughtful, and inquisitory. That really just sends me over the moon. So for me, that's great, because this is your document at the end of the day. I'm providing it. So thanks so much for your time, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
He does a good job of painting a picture.
Yeah, those time was
No,
spent.
he's talking-
Steve, just for the record, what was your vote on that motion?
All in favor.
All in favor.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
It looked like
Steve is nodding and agreeing.
Usually.
Yeah,
you'll-
Okay.
I said aye. I just probably
Okay.
didn't hit the mute button quick enough.
Right, I assume that's what you were saying, but
Yeah.
want to make sure we don't have discrepancies there. Great. So other items we can wrap up pretty quick here. 'Cause like I said, I know that was kind of a lot to work through. I'm pulling up the agenda. I think we had meeting times up next. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. schedule.
Yes. Yeah, so right now, our current meeting schedule is the second Tuesday of the month, from 9 to 11, and with the idea that if we need a second special meeting, that would typically happen the fourth Tuesday of the month, unless we need to change that for whatever reason. This time seems to be working well for most board members. Angie has not been able to make the meeting, so she asked if we were open to considering another time. Her schedule seems to be all over the place and just pretty hard to work with. She's traveling, I guess, depending on the month, either every Monday and Wednesday or every Tuesday and Thursday. So Fridays was one option, but I don't believe Friday works for some other
No.
folks. It's
No.
not ideal for myself.
Yeah, everybody's
No.
shaking their head no.
Okay, great. And I
Yes.
knew, I mean, just in all honesty, when we had a board with 11 members that were not signing up to a set meeting time, I was going to be shocked if we found a time that worked for everybody. And so I don't want to exclude, but I think there's just some realities that it's hard to schedule for this many people.
Yeah.
One request she made was potentially it would work a little better for her in the afternoons, or if we switch to the later part of the month, then it sounds like she has more availability to meet that third or fourth week versus the first or second week. The sense I get though is that attendance is not guaranteed, but that would be the easiest switch if it works for people.
I mean,
So I'll just
that-
throw that out to the group for your thoughts and availability.
the later part of the month doesn't matter for me, but like Katie's a board member and I'm planning, and those are both later part of the month meetings. You were facilitating all those, so I would think maybe that's a conflict with the later part of the month, having 2 board meetings a day or potentially 3 days in a row. It doesn't matter to me.
I'm
but
retired, but
that-
it's,
That's like everyone who actually facilitates this meeting, that would mean, 3 days in a
you
row
know,
board meetings.
this is recorded. Now, people can watch this. Is that correct? Do we have a YouTube channel?
Yeah, these are
So-
posted.
People that are not here can watch it and bring in their comments
Yeah,
at the next
meeting.
meeting or email them
Yeah.
to
I think
Sarah
Angie
or
did say that she
Lori.
has been keeping up with watching on,
Yeah.
watching
Yeah.
recorded.
Well, and
Yeah.
let's say, put it this way, I think for the majority of the meetings, we've had a really good number of people here. And
Yeah.
because we have 11 board members, if we have 7 to 8 always in-house, that is good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if
My
you can make the half the meetings.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I just don't think that, 10 people moving the entire schedule for one is
Yeah.
fair to
Yeah.
that. No offense to
Yeah.
Angie.
Yeah, and
Angie
to
would be a
build on
great
Katie's,
addition, but
I love-
it's, we're sorry that your schedule is not working, but
Well, it sounds like she could make every other month too, with this time anyway,
Yeah.
so I think
Okay.
that's.
It
pretty good.
sounds like she has mandatory meetings at the beginning of the month. So if it was a third or fourth, I think she would still be virtual and potentially traveling, but maybe there'd be more flexibility. But like my understanding with this meeting slot is that she's actually on a plane most of the time.
That's
So
why
I feel like it's just hard
Right.
to know because we've been meeting a lot on the 2nd and 4th, and it's been difficult for her to attend pretty much all of our meetings thus far. I think she's been able to make it to 2.
Maybe she could be the sweeper, kind of come in, watch everything, tell us what she thinks,
Uh-huh.
clean up, clean
Yeah.
up.
Well, and
Well,
one
and
of
I
the things
think-
that we all have to keep in mind is, to Katie's point, the meetings are recorded, you can watch them. And at the subsequent meeting, you know, we kind of do it as a pro forma, but if you have a real disagreement with even something that was voted on, you have the opportunity during the review of the minutes to say, hold on, I'd like to enter into the minutes my opposition to subject whatever, or raise it. And I think that that's something that provides for somebody missing a meeting as long as they do their homework.
And we also have the agenda beforehand. So if you really feel strongly about talking about something on that agenda, you'll make a point to talk about it, whether on email
There you go.
or
Yeah,
after.
exactly.
Okay.
Sorry.
I will just add that our bylaws, I should have looked this up beforehand. I'm trying to find it now. I believe it states something to the effect, I know this is recorded, but don't quote me on this exact number, that you can't miss more, what I'm remembering is 3 regular meetings in a row
Yeah.
Without notifying.
without being excused, yeah.
And we have excused her every time, right?
You know, sometimes she's been able to let me know. Other times, I think for a while she said she thought that her emails were forwarding to her DDA address and they weren't. I did find it. It says section 4.2 of the bylaws, attendance in the event of an unexcused absence of a board member for 3 consecutive regular meetings. A letter may be written by the chair or the director at the direction of the board to the Board of Trustees, requesting removal of that board member pursuant to section 2.2 of these rules in the Downtown Development Authority Act.
Okay.
And I don't even
So I think it would be a
that
question of if we feel she can continue to be an
Yeah.
active board member and if we would want to continue to excuse those absences, knowing that she's not going to be able to make most meetings.
And I'd like to, maybe we can put that back to her also
Yeah.
to just
Yeah.
say, okay, this is in our bylaws, we can't really change them.
But
Yeah,
it's
because
not
they've been adopted.
unexcused. The key word is unexcused, and we've excused her.
Yeah.
She said for every meeting, well, we pretty much have excused her. So
Yeah.
Hey,
if
she's
she
gonna
wants
watch
to clean
the-
up and
yeah,
read,
she's
I'm
gonna
happy
watch
for her
and,
to
yeah,
read
send
it.
some
Yeah.
emails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And tell
Yeah.
me what I look like
Yeah.
here. You know, what
We
are
have
we
to have
saying?
proof of engagement, though. She can, you know,
Yeah.
input
Yeah.
needs to be
Yeah.
confirmed, basically.
Join when you can.
So maybe if she has no proof
Sounds
of
like the name of a
engagement,
movie.
then
Yeah.
Proof of engagement.
it does.
I think you just want to just consider, is that a member that can't participate actively in your meetings on a regular basis? Would the board be better off to have somebody that can participate in the meetings? And I think that's a board decision to consider.
Mhm.
If you want that active presence in a meeting, or if it's okay, all outside of the meeting. It's just something to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only that I mean, just for me, we have so many here all the time, and so many that if there's somebody looking at it from an outside perspective, I think it kind of helps us for someone to review meetings. Maybe we could ask her to review meetings.
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have like the property owner, the resident, the business owner, all kind of spoken for
Yeah.
in more than one case. So
So I think it's kind of
I
up
don't
to
think
her,
we're
right?
missing
Yeah, I think it's up to her.
in meeting
Yeah.
input, but
Okay.
It's not like I want her or don't want her.
Right.
I know. I mean,
Yeah, she's
if she
very
feels-
Well, I
intelligent.
can check back in with her. I know she had stated that it was hard for her to actively participate without being in the meetings. So let me see what she thinks. I don't know if she has watched any of the recordings. I think maybe she's just tried to look at the minutes, which I feel like it's hard to really get a sense unless you're either at the meetings or watching the meetings later.
yeah.
But I can check with her and then maybe we can revisit this in December, since we generally have most members present and have a few missing today.
You know, do we have to reelect somebody if we get rid of her? That's a question
No, the
too.
bylaws state that we don't have to fill the position. We can have less than 11.
But if there's 10, that's not good either.
Yeah.
Five,
I'm just saying
five.
that bylaws don't require it,
Okay,
but
yeah.
it can definitely be done. Yeah.
So we eliminate 2. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Or maybe there's another really good person
Or
that
there's a
wants
bunch
to
of
be
people
on,
who-
so.
I'd give her the option, say, hey, this is how you can work with the Tuesday meeting on the second Tuesday. Send us emails, follow up for the next meeting. If she wants to do that, I have no issue letting her do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And just kind of tell her this is how it's gonna work if you can't be there
yeah,
all the time.
yeah. Thank you.
It's also a nice out if she is getting busier.
Yeah,
It is one more thing, right?
yeah, yeah.
If I was flying
No
every
one's gonna
Tuesday,
take it
I'd be like,
personally.
well, this is a lot.
Okay.
All right, so second Tuesday, 9 to 11,
Yes.
sticking with it.
Staying with it.
Like,
Okay.
Just one quick thing. This seems like an appropriate time. At where I am in my life, my volunteer activities are numerous, but I do have one rule of thumb. If there's 8 inches or more of powder up on the hill, I prioritize that. So
This is
there
recorded.
may be
Steve.
one meeting a winter where I'm being a powder hound rather than showing up. And apologies in advance, but that's what I'm going to do.
okay,
Should we put that in the?
fair
Yeah,
enough.
we could put that in the bylaws. I mean, I'm okay with
Yeah.
I love that idea.
I'm with that. We could just do it on the hill, you know.
Yeah.
Tune in.
All the better.
That's
Yeah.
okay, we'll know.
Feed it
All
some-
right. So next up, I wanted to make sure folks were aware and just wanted to plant the seed if there was something that the DDA thought we might look at doing to kind of capitalize on it. But the ski train is expanding its service this year. So it's going to run during the holidays for just a couple weekends in December. I've never understood why it waits till January to start versus normally running through the holidays. But and then starting in January, I believe it's Thursday through Monday that it's going to run. It's going to have 2 extra cars. Looks like the price is coming down a decent amount as well, which I think is super exciting. And it's actually going to let people off and on in Fraser, which is great. I think makes a lot of sense. That ski train, I'm sure you've all seen it. It just pulls past Fraser and sits there for the day. So I don't think there's any great reason for it to not stop in Fraser. That said, the ski train is obviously geared towards skiers. I don't know that there's a huge draw for them to then come to Fraser, but I just
Well,
thought it might be
but-
worth thinking about if there may be promotions or things that could be offered to try to encourage people to come apres in Fraser or to capitalize on folks who aren't skiing but maybe using the ski train to get up and down from Fraser.
Yeah, and Sarah, forgive the interruption. I would add that this is not the end game. The state is looking pretty hard at a multiple train service per day model by 2027 that would also go to Steamboat and Craig. So I think part of our thinking should be what is our longer range plan to get people in Denver to take the train and lodge, eat, etc. in Fraser, come to a show, because that could be a very regular source of guests.
Right. Well, clear
Yeah, and
signage
it's
is-
been
we're gonna need
floated,
that.
Steve, just within our staff internally. I don't know if this is accurate. It's our own musings, but that potentially, they're stopping in Fraser and kind of seeing how it goes with the stop, because the stops, if this expands all the way up to Craig, are still not 100% defined. It looks like they are planning for a stop in Fraser, but I think it would be great if there actually was traffic getting on and off the train to help encourage that process.
One thing I
Um,
see like at that, not to interject or interrupt, sorry, but I think that we will have to draw them into town a little bit because it does sit like you stare at a car wash when you pull up in the backside of Ace and some like used nasty cars that wrecked and they're like holding lot over here. So how are you going to attract them down into town? Yeah, you can see down that street, but you don't see anything that tells you how nice it is.
So like
So-
the older gentleman that I helped out last October in the snow, he's like 90, got off the train and he's looking down the street at the snow. He said, "This town is really small."
Yeah, 'cause it doesn't look down Main Street, so
Yeah.
we might need to do something about that if you want people to get off and walk
It's
into
a good
town.
place for like one of those maps that they can like walk right to and be like, pinpoint
Yeah.
points of interest
Right.
Like in
right away. Walk right off, just the town of Fraser
So,
map.
yeah, and if, I think, so Sarah, do
That's a
we
great-
have a little bit of money to spend this year?
Yeah, I like that.
We do, yeah, and I'll just add staff
Just
internally.
thinking
and just-
about the people getting off the train, like that old guy, and there's still, when they get off the train, it's like, okay, what do I do? And maybe there's the scan for the bus, but Home James is also offering local
Mhm.
taxi service. And to be able to have a sign with a map and a link to our Fraser promo website
Yep.
and
And
transportation,
Lyft and
Home James,
and yeah.
bus,
Yep,
that kind of stuff,
all
so
that.
they could see it when they get down off and they go to that kiosk.
The full resource board, yeah.
And I think
exactly.
that would be really good investment. If
I think so
nothing
too.
else, we're taking
Very
care of them
good.
when they're here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
signage is huge, and that's it. You walk 100 yards or so, maybe less, 75 yards, and you are able to get golfing, food,
Oh, right.
Well,
transportation.
When I was in Estes a couple weeks ago, that's exactly, so you just, right at the hub of like their Riverwalk is like, it's a map and it says 0.7 miles to this, 0.2 miles to this,
Yep.
point this many yards to this. So it was easy to just look at the map and be like, okay, I know I can make it a half mile, like, let's go there, or let's do this. It's
Yeah.
a lot easier to navigate on foot than
Mhm.
it would be here because you just don't know how far things are away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's right there.
Yeah,
Was it
and
the
we shouldn't
DDA
forget-
that was approached about the map making, or was it the town board? Sarah?
That was Sarah.
I think she was.
Oh, why?
Sarah Wick is working on the map making, and we just this week have had internal discussions about something like what you're talking about, having some sort of little kiosk, something we can put materials in right when people get off the train. So it is just about 11 a.m., but I would suggest if everyone kind of thinks more about that. Steve, go
Could I
ahead.
just make one comment? Sometimes
Yeah.
it's hard to not talk over people. We shouldn't forget the lift. I know Sarah's on that because that is free and it gets anywhere in the valley. But two, the natural inclination here is to think about people coming to Fraser. I do think there's real opportunity for us to promote the fact that you can be a resident here and take the train to Denver. And I mean, I went to the trouble to coordinate and write down the schedules of the Mustang and the train and the Amtrak Zephyr. And they're on a daily basis. You can get to and from Denver on public transportation. I don't think that's widely recognized by people in the valley, and that's something we could promote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been talking with Sarah about better promoting that through the town channels, but I wholly agree that'd be great for the DDA to promote. And I think also just think about maybe, Apres buy one, get one, some sort of promotion to
Totally.
encourage people to stop off in Fraser before they head down to Denver on the
Can
steam
you
train.
still advertise on the train itself? Like they should have stuff in, like we should be able to call Union Station or whatever. The
We
rail
were
should
talking
be able
about
to
that. We're not
advertise,
sure.
saying come, yeah, because like you get on the bus, they used to have like the little posters in it that says wine and dine at Dino's, and you're reading that. Yeah.
Better on the tickets themselves,
On
Uh-huh.
the tickets too, yeah.
Yeah, on the ticket.
Oh, yeah, like
Yeah.
like a little coupon.
coupons on the tickets in the back.
Yeah, because I agree. It's about getting them
you don't
from
know that
Winter Park down here
Yeah.
on the train or to Denver.
Offers.
Yeah, and when we have things like Fire and Ice this year, there's going to be a month-long ice sculpture. We can promote that in Denver and include public transportation routes.
Mm-hmm.
Is the town pursuing potentially leasing that land east of the railroad track for additional parking, or is that something the DDA has to pursue?
My understanding is that it is very difficult to work with the railroad.
Yes.
Not that that's an excuse to do nothing with them,
Even when
but that we have unofficially used it and promoted it as parking. It works better in the non-snow removal months because a lot of snow gets built up there.
Just from the, I didn't mean to cut you off, but from like the beautification, and right now, since it's unofficial, anyone can just like park there and camp there and there's no enforcement of it.
yeah.
So I think if we did have something formal, granted, it might be a lift getting the railroad to agree, but then we can improve it and actually regulate what goes there, what doesn't go there, which I think is a good idea, especially if this is kind of a test run for having a stop in Fraser.
Mhm.
I think that would, showing that, hey, we want this to be a clean, safe space where people can park and use the rail. Showing that initiative might be a good idea.
Yeah, I can try to look into more what it would look like to do something officially. I mean, that was Air's thought as well, that in terms of your cheapest, easiest, ready to go parking option, it's right along the railroad tracks
it does
there.
get a
And you
challenge.
can't do anything else there really, other than
That's
snow
why I own my
removal.
own spot at the tracks
Yeah.
every
We,
winter.
Yeah.
you know, it's also,
Sit right
could
there
be
every
one of
day.
those things right now. That is all in railroad right away. And they could say yes, or they could say, oh, you guys been parking there all this time? No, we don't allow parking there. Might backfire. I don't know,
Yeah, I
but
mean,
it's, anyway, okay, it's 11:01.
Yeah, any other business?
I move to adjourn.
All right,
second.
all in favor?
I
Thank you.
Okay, thank
Yes.
y'all. Good work.
See you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Antoinette, thanks for your help today.
Thank you, Sarah. And Antoinette.
Yeah, oh yeah, he's a read the train every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean.